Now yours.
All right, thank you. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Barbara Sorter with the California Council for Exceptional Children. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar series. Today's topic is an introduction to the CDE California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities. On behalf of California CEC, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Deborah Escalante Montoya. Dr. Montoya is the Senior Director for the Imperial County SELPA. Dr. Montoya has over 20 years of experience working with and leading programs for students with disabilities. Dr. Montoya is a strong advocate for students with disabilities and English language learners. She believes in the important work of educators and the array of opportunities they can provide to ensure equitable and accessible learning environments for each student. Dr. Montoya has worked as a school psychologist, principal, director of special education and support services prior to her role as a SELPA senior director. At present, she is leading the SELPA content lead work, improving outcomes for students with disabilities who are English learners in partnership with the California Department of Education and the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. Dr. Montoya is joined by her colleague, Ms. Vanessa Lopez. Ms. Lopez is a SELPA coordinator with Imperial County Office of Education. She will be presenting and monitoring the chat. So please feel free to utilize the chat feature for your questions. And also the Padlet resources are also going to be there, and you can find them there and click on them. And so at this time, we will begin our presentation, and I will turn it over to Dr. Montoya.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Dr. Sorter. Appreciate yourself and John for the warm welcome and invitation. It's our honor and pleasure to present for the Council for Exceptional Children of California group, as again, every year we're so honored to present and provide information regarding improving outcomes for English learners with disabilities. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Today will be an introduction, so a bird's eye view, if you will, of the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities. We will be covering this robust document created by many experts in the field. We just have the opportunity and the pleasure to be able to present and share the information with you along with our own experiences. So we appreciate this opportunity to further share resources. So in the Padlet for today, you will see just a vast array of resources regarding each and every chapter found within the California Practitioner's Guide. The presentation slides are also found in the first column. The Padlet link you can remake and share with others as you see appropriate, because they truly are free resources for you to utilize in the field and to continue in this good work as we collaboratively and collectively commit ourselves to improve outcomes for English learners with disabilities. So today we have myself and Vanessa Lopez. Vanessa, a strong advocate, teacher, EL coach, and now coach with our work in improving outcomes, doing so much. In addition, I have to say some of the wonderful infographics that you'll find on our Padlet created by her, because as we know, the California Practitioner's Guide is such a robust document. And as we work within the California system of support, yes, in Imperial County, way down Southeast California, we want to ensure that the resources that we provide you are usable, that you can take them back to your respective SELPAs, COEs, districts, school sites as you see appropriate, so that you can continue to help refine, shape, mold your programs and services for English learners and English learners with disabilities. So although today we are just one of the SELPA content leads, there are others in relation to assistive technology, to equity and disproportionality, systems improvement work occurring throughout the SELPA. So as we work together to shape and support the participants today, we understand maybe from LEAs, maybe from COEs, maybe you're a geographic lead agency. And again, our resources are free and usable to anyone as you feel you need them. Again, in this particular topic that we know has continued to be an area of concern, we see it as a positive that it's been highlighted, the work of English learners and English learners with disabilities, that experts in the field have come together regarding the California Practitioner's Guide And as in our work, we work as connectors, providing capacity and professional development as we are today, and facilitating and supporting in that work. So we do have a one-page document that talks a little bit about the grant work that we are entrusted by California Department of Education and the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence in the support and dissemination of the California Practitioner's Guide. And where we get started is an assurance that all students in California are general education students first, that all students, regardless of eligibility, of label, of ethnicity, race, creed, but that all students are unique. All students are able to make progress, to demonstrate growth, and develop at his or her own potential. And we value what each and every student brings to our school system. As they cross that threshold into our schools, we want to ensure that all students are afforded equal opportunity, access, ability to make educational benefit. So as we consider the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners with Disabilities, we'll be giving you a broad stroke overview of each of the sections and the chapters contained within the California Practitioner's Guide. Begins with identification of whom are your English learner students, followed by potential pre-referral and referral, as some English learners may be suspected as eligible as a student with a disability. We'll then go into educational programs, the IEP process, should a student be eligible for special education, the potential proposition for exit, should that be necessary, and then reclassification of English learners. So we'll begin with section 1, identification of English learners and the MTSS process and pre-referral interventions. As we know, in California, we've had a heightened awareness of the numbers of students with disabilities who are English learners dually identified with an IEP. And the aim of section 1 is to truly understand our systems of support. But first, we acknowledge the data that there are students across California with IEPs who are English learners. When we consider the LCFF subgroups, and English learners being one of those subgroups, foster youth, and those students who are low socioeconomic background, we have students with IEPs in this blue section in each of these pockets. So we come back for our administrators to acknowledge that as all students are general education students first, we may have students duplicated in these respective groups. For English learners, we have about 25% of English learners with IEPs in California, based on the last data of 1920. And as we work to meet the needs of English learners, we are also cognizant of the historical information, the information that has led us to understand that students whom are English learners potentially have not received all of the services and supports. The attributes and the needs that they have not been recognized. But with fundamental action as a result of Lau versus Nichols, Castañeda versus Pickard, when we understand the history, we also understand that our students are very capable of growing, of learning, and require and are entitled to meaningful access, curriculum, and instruction, as all English learners have skills and abilities, bring their own relative strengths and assets to our schools. And the California Global Economy Initiative has highlighted that work, has highlighted the information and the research, and in support of our students as multilingual learners, as emergent learners. So we stop at who are English learners. Let us first identify and frame our reference of who our students are as they enroll in our California school systems. Upon initial enrollment, we have our students who come in at TK or any time regarding in relation to their trajectory of learning when they initial for the first time in a US school. And here in California, we have the home language survey completed once by the parent or guardian. The initial determinations are reported in CalPADS. We do have a reporting structure. And when we have our students enroll within that initial LPAC is administered to our students to identify the needs of the student as an English learner. or to determine if that English learner is English proficient, and they would then be classified as an IFED. So as we have families coming into our systems, we want to assure that the information is gathered from parents, that they understand that there are supports and services that eligible English learners are entitled to receive to ensure that they are supported in the process of English language acquisition. As we identify our English learners through the summative assessment process, so for those students who have been identified as English learners, we may have students who then will take the LPAC or the alternate LPAC, and we'll share a little bit more about the alternate LPAC in a few more slides. The summative assessment given during the testing window as all students, so English learners, and students who are already identified as students with disabilities also take the summative LPAC. It measures yearly progress, ensuring that we have a better understanding of our students, their English language proficiency level, how we then may integrate and utilize the English language development standards appropriately to ensure again that students are making growth and progress in their English language acquisition. The LPAC information will also assist us with eligibility for reclassification from their English learner status as appropriate. So as we come into a new school year, we recognize that the alternate LPAC is just around the corner. And for initial LPAC, again, we'll come back to that information in just a little bit. But let's first start with MTSS before special education referral. This is the segment where we want to preface and ensure that we have a general understanding as a statewide system of support, that all students receive universal supports. And some students may require supplemental supports, few students receiving intensive supports, and recognizing that special education is outside of these tiers of support. That special education may be that fourth, fifth tier. And specifically and uniquely for English learners, this tier 1 for all English learners includes comprehensive ELD, both designated and integrated ELD, as a base, as a system for our administrators as we consider our LCAP priorities and what are core basic services for English learners. That includes English language development, again, both designated and integrated. And we'll come back and thread that throughout our session as you'll hear today, because the importance of that foundation and support for our English learners will also assist our teams in determining if special education is suspected. What are some of those considerations? And those considerations are so important as we want to ensure that we're providing our English learners with enough time, interventions, and supports prior to the perception or the referral for special education. So these are some questions that your teams may consider. Are we providing English learners enough time in tier 2 before considering tier 3? That may also involve your team's considerations for what are the differences between tier 2 and tier 3? What interventions exist within your tiers of support at your respective school site? If you're a district administrator, as you support your school sites, perhaps a county office as you assist the districts, and the SELPAs working together with our English learner specialists to also identify our students provided with ample supports prior to that referral for special education. What are our progress monitoring methods and tools? Maybe a question that you're pondering at this time. And do any of your assessment data that are being utilized at your school site, whether it be a district-wide benchmark assessment, whether it's intervention programs as adopted, are they culturally and linguistically responsive? Are our staff, our personnel, building communities within our schools where we align our systems, where we align our supports and interventions to ensure culturally and linguistic responsive practices? Because we also note that across California, many of you may have various languages, dialects within languages represented within your respective school sites, districts, county offices, and SELPAs. So as we walk into section 2 of the California Practitioner's Guide, we also consider pre-referral and referral assessment and the IEP process should a student be identified as an English learner with a disability. And such why it is so important to ensure that the referrals for special education are appropriate. Our goal always to ensure that referrals are appropriate as to not have over-identification of English learners as a student with a disability, nor under-identification of students who are English learners who may have a disability. So as referrals come in, maybe a staff, parent, guardian, counselor, teacher, anyone can refer for special education evaluation. It then becomes the responsibility of that student success team. Maybe it's an English language acquisition team. We'd hope both together in consideration of the needs for English learners as we identify again those targeted supports and interventions. And what are the student's relative needs given that child's profile, taking into consideration their English learner acquisition, skills, and scores given the LPAC data. As we analyze that data and ensure that intentional teaching, again, for students whom are English learners, includes core structures and supports, given that they receive comprehensive ELD, culturally and linguistically responsive and relevant instruction. As we consider the English language learner roadmap and the principles, a foundational document which you can also find in the Padlet that we've shared today. Because as we hone in on principle 1 of the English learner roadmap, which is assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools, our starting point, if you will, to ensure that we are being responsive to the needs of our English learners, that we've carefully looked at our interventions, the implementation of those interventions, and how we as administrators support our staff members. If you're teachers, service providers, school psychologists, speech therapists also attending this session, we hope that again, our certificated staff and classified staff are equally receiving supports, professional development, in again, data-based intentional teaching, in understanding the ELD standards, the needs of English learners, and how to differentiate and support the varied needs of English learners. Because we want to also point out that English learners are not a homogeneous group. We have students whom are newcomers, students who have been in US schools for their entire school career. We have students who are at different phases and levels in their progression and development as they acquire a new language, English, and as they also maintain and develop their primary language in many programs as well. So we make adjustments to those interventions and refer for further assessment only if necessary and required. Because in California, what we do know is there is an inordinate amount of English learners who are represented amongst the eligibility categories found in IDEA, but specifically in this category, which is specific learning disability. This particular disability category, in California, about 37% of students identified in this category. But what we also know is that there are students whom are English learners who are duly identified as an English learner with a disability in this category of specific learning disability. So as we work through the referral process potentially, it's very important for our general educators. So welcome if there's general educators attending today's session, thank you so much. And for those of you who are special educators and professionals attending this session, we highly recommend and encourage that you share this information of what a specific learning disability is and what it isn't as you work with your general education staff, ensuring that your student study teams for English learners also include EL specialists, that we have general educators as well as special educators working together to demystify, if you will, to build common language in support of English learners as well as students with disabilities. So as we identify what a specific learning disability is, understanding that children may have gaps in learning, may have a severe discrepancy, may have patterns of strengths and weaknesses in any of these areas that you see listed here, which are part of this definition of specific learning disability. For our special educators, it is clear to us that this definition is tied or married to item number 2, where not only do we have this severe discrepancy, but it must be also directly linked and related to a processing disorder. Without that linkage, the student may not be eligible under this disability category of specific learning disability. So it's important to work with our staff, our general educators, and again, look back to what are our interventions, what are our tiers of interventions, as we may not have fully explored all the interventions, giving these specific and respective areas where a child may have relative weaknesses, may need further intervention and supports. So as we think about our SST process, again, including our EL specialists, so that we can talk through and dialogue when we see maybe dips or gaps in learning. Because again, children may have a processing disorder, but may not. And very important to note, what is not a specific learning disability? So the rule out factors, if you will. A student may not be referred for special education or suspected for a learning disability if it's solely due to a referral due to limited experience or poor school attendance, environmental, cultural, and socioeconomic disadvantage. As we know, not all English learners are socioeconomic disadvantaged. But if there are these needs, these themselves would not be the basis for a referral for special education. And specifically intellectual disability, which has its own criterion, as well as emotional disturbance, its own criterion for eligibility. But you'll see highlighted here and in bold, limited English proficiency in and of itself is not the reason for a referral for special education, because language difference is different than a learning disability. And it's important to note that as we work with our teams together as special educators and general educators, that's truly how we'll be able to leverage our expertise, our knowledge, and support in support of English learners. This link is also found in your Padlet, and this particular figure is an amazing resource. It's a foundational resource. Thank you to Dr. Joyce Butterfield. She still works out in the field in California, who helped create this fundamental document that we refer many practitioners across California to, which is language difference versus disability. Although not an exhaustive list, it is a great supportive tool to bring again teams together and have active conversations of how students are performing. What does learning look like for students in relation to their listening, speaking, reading, writing skills, social, emotional, and behavioral skills? As we know, all of them have impacts on English learners and their progression towards learning. And then again, those indicators of possible or potential learning disability where processing disorders may be noted. So again, this particular resource is for you to utilize with your teams as a starting point for conversations to help you identify where perhaps further data is necessary, where further interventions may be necessary. So again, this is a jigsaw activity that's linked in. You can take it, use it with your teams as you see appropriate. You might also use this figure during student study team, student success team meetings, English language acquisition team meetings, to again help frame the conversation and support and acknowledgement that language difference, again, is a difference, not necessarily a disability. The students may be suspected as having a disability and assessed as having a disability, but we first want to understand the difference, the language learning needs, language acquisition need of our students. And that takes us to pre-referral. So we spend so much time in this space because, again, as practitioners, we want to come together across the state to identify promising practices, as many of your districts do have promising practices. And you may be sitting in your seat and saying, thank you, we are using these resources. We ensure that our pre-referral systems include staff, of course, parents and guardians, families, And that our multidisciplinary team, in addition, includes our EL specialists, our special educators, if there is a suspicion towards special education. And that as that multidisciplinary team evolves, that it truly is multidisciplinary as we consider the varied needs of students whom are English learners. The student queue and file checklist, very important. This particular appendix found in the California Practitioner's Guide is downloadable, savable, and fillable through our website and via the Padlet. This document from the California Practitioner's Guide helps hone in our eye, if you will, to ensure that we're focused into the needs of English learners and other factors and features that may also be affecting the students' learning, such as hearing and vision, health concerns, any attendance, any other factors that may be affecting students' learning. Followed by extrinsic factors. This is a wonderful resource. And again, I can't tell you enough how thankful we are for the committee and support and practitioners who develop these resources that are in the Practitioner's Guide. The English Learner Extrinsic Factors is a great support to the entire multidisciplinary team. You may want to translate this particular document as you work with families in acknowledgement and support of needs, as we have many students, especially coming out of the pandemic, whose families may have experienced job loss, home loss, sickness, illness, in addition to varied needs that our students have from our English learners. So I want to say thank you, Angela Gaviria, thank you for being in our session today. Tim Tipton, her counterpart also at San Diego Unified, has been a wonderful resource to us and all of the supports in the Practitioner's Guide. So it's great to see that we're amongst friends as we promote this good work. And again, all of the resources in the Practitioner's Guide are free for use for all in California as you work again to identify what may be the impacts for learning, the needs of our students prior to the referral for special education eligibility. So with that, there are some additional resources that your respective school districts, school sites, county offices, and SELPAs may also be working together and in conjunction, again, to leverage the skills, the expertise in the field of special educators and EL specialists. The EL roadmap is linked in as well as the EL roadmap toolkits. You may want to look to Californians Together and the EL Rise group, who are doing just phenomenal work across California, as well as GABE and the Multilingual Support Division at CDE. So many resources out there as we identify here: progress monitoring and data collection, ensuring that English learners are receiving integrated and designated ELD. And what does that look like for the student? And again, that reference of language difference versus disability. Is the student in their need being addressed through interventions, or is there more? Are there greater suspicions and red flags potentially, where then again referral and assessment to determine eligibility will be necessary for the student? Here again are some additional resources, a checklist to help you as practitioners in the field continue to look at your processes and identify how does this match or parallel our existing referral processes within our district. Perhaps as you look through your own process map, you'll feel confident to say, yes, we are identifying and ensuring that students are being acknowledged for their language difference and supported as they bring assets and skills, as we value primary language and help students bridge into their new language of English. And where again, we may identify further and greater need to then proceed with the assessment for potential eligibility for special education, should it be necessary. So as we consider assessment for special education eligibility, the requirements, the definitions, and the mandates are clearly laid out for us in IDEA, as we want to ensure that our assessments are comprehensive, valid, and reliable, that assessment referrals are truly indicating that there is a suspicion, and what that is, as we want to ensure that we are assessing for all areas of suspected disability. I often reference we because I still consider myself in practice as a school psychologist. Having been a bilingual school psychologist, I recognize that that also gave me some advantages in working with my students. However, many of you may be bilingual as well: assessors, speech therapists, school psychologists, occupational therapists, APE specialists. However, we may not be fully bilingual in all of the varied languages that exist within California. So in that respect, there are language assessments. That is truly another topic in session as we consider the validity and the reliability of the assessment tools that are out there. We're always wishing and wanting more assessments that are appropriate for our English learners, given their language, their dialect, and understanding their cultural and linguistic needs. There is in the California Practitioner's Guide an appendix with various assessment tools. It's not an exhaustive list. And when we look at our responsibility to ensure the validity, as we look at the standardization of the assessments, we want to ensure that students are assessed appropriately to yield accurate information, to ensure that we are giving students the opportunity to show what they truly know academically, functionally, developmentally, and when clearly not feasible to do so, that we have other assessments within our repertoire, whether they're nonverbal assessments, that we're utilizing observations and dialogue and surveys, again, using a full comprehensive battery to ensure that students are neither over-identified nor under-identified. So as non-discriminatory evaluation is upheld, that we ensure that we are true to our students, and as assessors that we don't want to delay assessment, that every referral that we take into hand and prepping for that referral may take more time, again, for our English learners, because first best would be that, yes, we have a bilingual assessor who's able to assess that student in their given primary language, or that we identify when it is necessary to utilize an interpreter translator, that we're able to provide that interpreter translator with some support, some pre-training, some pre-work, that they assist us with all annotation and support of our assessment. And we ourselves as assessors, whether you're bilingual or not bilingual, but we take into consideration our own sensitivity to linguistics and culture. Appendix 4.3 is a great tool to assist our assessors with building rapport and working with our students to fully acknowledge the needs, and perhaps to help glean some information for ourselves as we engage in the selection of the assessment tools that we'll utilize. Also, as we frame our observations and our structured interviews of students, families, teachers, general educators, special educators, EL specialists, as we want to build, again, the full picture of supports and services that the student may still need, in addition to identifying should the student be eligible for special education supports and services. So this particular English learner language use tool, again, downloadable, fillable, usable, you can reformat it as you see appropriate amongst your own district and your assessors. And as we gather observation, these particular appendices found in the practitioner's guide can be used pre-referral, during referral, and also to help develop the IEP should the student be identified as a student who also has a disability. The English learner classroom observation checklist, focused observation of the English learner during instruction in English, and parent report as we build teacher engagement, parent and family guardian engagement, again, working together in support to identify, does the student need greater supports in attribute to their English language acquisition status, and or does the student have a disability? So as we look at all these varied needs and how supports are provided, we want to ensure, again, comprehensive, valid, and reliable assessments. So as I mentioned, there is an appendix in this chapter for potential bilingual assessment tools. Again, not an exhaustive list, but will help you as you, again, look to identify tools and resources to support you as you assess students who are English learners who may be identified as a student with a disability as well. So as we get into section 3, educational programs and instructional strategies, I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa Lopez. And again, my colleague in support of our work, leading this work alongside with me. Vanessa, I'll go ahead and let you take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. So we're going to head into section 3 of the California Practitioner's Guide. And those of you familiar with the structure of the guide know that there's 5 sections, and these sections have corresponding chapters. Here on section 3, we're looking specifically at educational programs and instructional strategies. Chapters 5, 6, and 7 are built around all areas that detail on programs and instructional strategies, starting with chapter 5 with all things IEP, chapter 6, then educational programming focused on access and equity, and then chapter 7, which is mostly pedagogy, teaching and learning to meet student needs. Let's delve in a little deeper as we move into our next slide. So let's start off with a quick question. What are key decisions that can only be made by the IEP team? This is one of the questions that comes up constantly. What are those key decisions that are the jurisdiction of the IEP team? And the California Practitioner's Guide has embedded in all of its chapters a series of frequently asked questions. So for example, here we have this particular question and then the answer, which is 3. Those 3 key decisions are the jurisdiction of the IEP team include language of instruction, accessibility, and the use of an alternate assessment, and how and where ELD instruction is going to be provided to the student, whether in a general education or a special education setting, and if that instruction will be provided by a gen ed teacher, a special education teacher, or any other mode, ensuring that comprehensive ELD, meaning designated and integrated, is being provided for each individual student. So again, this is one of the foundations when it relates to IEP development specific to English learners. Let's go to the next slide so we can go in a little bit deeper into the 6 main principles of IDEA. Those of us that are in the field of special education know exactly what these key tenets are, but it's never a hurtful thing or a negative thing to go over these, starting with free and appropriate public education, FAPE, appropriate evaluation, the IEP, the least restrictive environment, parent participation, and procedural safeguards. We're going to hit on parent participation and procedural safeguards in the next slide, but right now I just want to spend some time on FAPE. So under IDEA, every child with a disability is entitled to a free and appropriate public education, FAPE. And this is done to meet a child's unique needs and to prepare them for further education, employment, and ultimately independent living. Furthermore, courts have held that IDEA requires schools to prepare the IEP, which confer meaningful educational benefit, meaning that students should be able to have a focus on expectations, appropriate progress, transition into post-secondary education, and independent living. Moving on then to appropriate evaluations, with appropriate evaluations having to be implemented by a team of knowledgeable and trained evaluators. And an appropriate evaluation must determine and make recommendations regarding a child's eligibility for special education services in a timely manner, which then takes us to the IEP, the Individualized Education Plan. The IEP is a written document developed by the IEP team, and it draws upon existing evaluation information in order to meet a student's unique educational needs. So considering all of these different points, that then will help build and help us fill out this document, this individualized education program that will lead the IEP team into a variety of considerations where the team now, in considering least restrictive environment, must explore a number of alternatives that enable a student to participate in a gen ed classroom setting. And these may include classroom modifications, supplemental aids, services, alternative instructional methods, etc. Next slide. So now when we involve parent participation and procedural safeguards in ensuring active and meaningful parent and guardian participation, we know that the public agency must take whatever action is necessary to ensure meaningful participation. And this includes arranging for an interpreter for parents with deafness or those whose native languages may be other than English. And this also will allow the parent to participate fully in placement decisions. The parents of a child with a disability are members of any group that makes decisions regarding the placement and the LRE of that child, because the role of the parent is as equal participant and decision maker. Of course, knowing that California is a consent state. A lot of these procedural safeguards are established through procedural safeguards to help parents and students enforce their rights under federal law. The primary purpose of this requirement is twofold. Number one, it safeguards to protect parental access to information pertaining to placement and transition planning. And also these are in place to resolve disagreements. So procedural safeguards, translation of documents, interpreters as needed to ensure that meaningful parent participation in the development of the child's individual education program. Next slide. So oftentimes when collecting data or information from parents, we have the need of a structured form, a way of collecting information that will be relevant, that is going to support the development of the IEP. One of the many resources contained within the California Practitioner's Guide for Educating English Learners is the parent report form. Again, like all of the appendices that we're referencing today, these have been made available for you as individual standalone PDF documents that you can download, save locally, type in, save, print out as it best fits your needs. So these are accessible within the Padlet that we've shared with you today, and also through the Practitioner's Guide or by visiting our website and accessing the appendices on our resources page. These documents are fillable and may be editable using PDF editing software, where you can then look into perhaps translating some of these questions and using an interpreter, or if you have a bilingual assessor or a teacher who speaks the student's primary language, the parent's primary language, these can then be developed as a very useful tool in collecting data that is going to help inform the student's profile as we look to develop a tailored IEP. Next slide. And as we start collecting data, triangulating data, assessment data, observational data, as we start building all of this profile, that more robust multidimensional student profile, this will then become important as we consider the individual needs of the child and also the individual learning profile, considering that whatever it is that our students bring into the classroom as it relates to their primary language, culture, environment, the application and the use of this as assets-based and as a foundation to build upon. Next slide. Because although we know that that initial assessment with the LPAC to determine English language proficiency, and then that annual summative LPAC to determine growth annually, that is just one marker. However, we should not diminish the importance of the information that the LPAC gives us. The LPAC we know is required state test for our English language students to establish English language proficiency. And state and federal law require that local educational agencies administer the LPAC to all students K through 12 that are still English language learners. The LPAC is aligned with the ELD standards, the 2012 ELD standards, and it consists again of the two ELP assessments, the initial and the summative. As we can see from this graphic, there are 4 domains that are assessed: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. These can be developed and read further through receptive and or expressive, or through its performance areas: oral language, which is listening and speaking, and written language, which would be reading and writing. Next slide. So what does that have to do with the IEP? Well, we're talking specifically of the IEP process for English language learners. So knowing where it is that the student stands in regards to their English language proficiency is critical. And understanding also that there are 4 domains that are assessed is important as well. So let's not forget that we're talking about students' disability category. How is it that they qualified for an IEP? And now we're talking about English language proficiency as well. It is important to keep in mind English language proficiency and disability category, because disability category may impact specific domains in the measurement of the LPAC score. So remember, the LPAC gives us that overall, which is oftentimes what we might type into our present levels, or when sharing information, oh, they're a 1345, they're a level 3. But we know that these are a composite from oral language performance areas and written language performance areas. Knowing the impact that a student's identified disability might have in their listening, or in their speaking, or in their reading, or in their writing is critical. Case in point, a student who qualifies under SLD for academic area writing. We know that automatically, regardless of their LPAC score in writing, that area will require additional supports because of how the disability manifests in this individual student. So knowing all of these things and keeping all of this in mind as we're developing the IEP and its many components, from special factors to how those linguistically appropriate goals and objectives are going to develop, are critical. Next slide. Which then takes us to those ELD standards. Because when we're looking at the PLDs, our proficiency level descriptors, and understanding the student's language needs and the levels of linguistic supports that are going to be necessary, it's critical to understand what those levels mean. What is it when a student is at the emerging level? What is it when the student is at the expanding level? What is it when the student is at the bridging level? And knowing that these also can be broken down further in level 1, 2, or 3 in listening, level 1, 2, or 3 in speaking, level 1, 2, or 3 in writing. So again, knowing what this might look like and what those linguistic supports as they apply to that English language proficiency level look like are going to be critical, meaning that a student who is at the emerging level is going to require more extensive linguistic supports than, say, a student who is at the bridging level, who might require sporadic supports, perhaps only when learning more complex concepts or in demonstrating more complex skills that involve multiple steps and that are a little more rigorous as it involves language and cognitive tasks. So again, keeping all of that in mind is important as we look at part 1 of those ELD standards. So if we look at this grayed out section, we're looking at the 3 sections of part 1 of the ELD standards, which is how we use English language and to collaborate, to interpret, and to produce. So again, collaborative, exactly as it's described here, it's engagement and dialogue with others, whereas the interpretive is comprehension and analysis of written and spoken texts. And then finally, productive, creation of oral presentations and written texts. Going back to the example that I shared of a student who qualifies for an IEP under a disability category SLD specifically for writing, if we go back to their LPAC score and we remember weakness as related to the other domains was writing, and I know that the disability category is SLD for writing, then I know that in the productive section of those ELD standards, I'm going to want to address how it is that the student is going to create written texts and what the impact or manifestation of the disability, how does that interact? How does that intersect with language proficiency and those learning tasks that I'm going to be working with this particular student in the classroom? Next slide. Which takes us to, well, okay, that's great. You're giving me all of these performance levels, but where do I see what this looks like? Where can I get this information? Well, the student score report is a great way to start. The image you're seeing right now is that initial, it's a sample student score report for the initial LPAC. And we can see that this individual sample student scored at the overall score 600, which makes him initial fluent English proficient, IFEP, therefore not an English learner. However, if we were to look at a summative LPAC score for a student who was identified as being an English learner, we'll be able to see additional information information that's really going to inform our practice and the development of the IEP. Let's take a look at that in the very next slide. So in this next slide, we're seeing a sample student score report for the LPAC summative, the annual portion of the LPAC that is given to measure progress and growth. So let's take a quick look at this and break it down so we can understand what it is that we see, because this in turn will inform how it is that we develop the IEP and how it is that we adjust and accommodate and design for the very specific needs of our English learners for disabilities. This sample student scored a level 3, 1525. Now, oftentimes in IEP development, communication development, or the section that requires the LPAC, we plop in that number for overall score and the overall for moderately developed, and that fulfills that purpose, correct? No, right? Because it gives us additional information. And one of the great things that this report does is that it allows you to have a starting point to process and understand. So prior to this current role that I have at Imperial County SELPA, I taught for 18 years in an RSP and an SDC setting. And oftentimes practices, my own including early on in my career, was just to add those scores because it met that requirement to add that score. However, I really didn't know exactly what that meant or what impact it would have in academics. And as you know, years and experience and trainings came into my way, and I began to looking at this completely, then it gives us another level of understanding. So this individual student is a level 3. 1525 moderately developed. Okay, great. Below it, this student score report tells me what the student can do at each level. This student was a level 3. I find level 3, look down, 1514 to 1599, moderately developed. This student can usually use English to learn new things in school. Okay, but what about the different domains? Move over to the next page. When we're looking at the oral language composite, we see that we have scores for listening and speaking. When I do a comparison between listening and speaking, I can see that there is a difference. The student is well developed in listening, somewhat moderately developed in speaking. So there's a difference there. So that composite might make me think that they're the same in both listening and speaking. However, I can see that there's some difference. I know that when we are engaging in oral language tasks, the student will require more supports when it relates to speaking than in listening. When we look at reading and writing, they're both comparable, somewhat moderately. However, we know that there is a range. We know that there is a range in everything, right? Even in how students manifest in their disability and in their language proficiency. So I know that the written language composite is 1560, which is still a level 3. However, as it relates to points, it's higher than the oral language composite, but I know that reading and writing are commensurate. They're almost, or they're right there on top of each other as it relates to ability. Now, if we look at this bottom section, now I'm able to look at the LPAC score history. Prior year, grade 4, the student was a level 3. So face value, there was no growth. They were a 3 last year, they're a 3 this year. However, I can see that they were moderately developed at 1495 the year prior. And this year they were a 1525, moderately developed. So some growth made there. So that lets me know that there is progression in the development of the English language for this particular student. Just by looking at the score report, I'm able to tell also that the area that the student has developed the most and is able to demonstrate, keyword demonstrate, where mastery in is in listening. So I'm going to pay special attention into the other areas and determine if it's an overall area of need as when it relates to speaking, reading, and writing, or is it text specific? Is it task specific? When does it manifest? And where does the student not require the same level of linguistic support, whether it be moderate, whether it be light, whether it be substantial? Again, this information will start us in looking at the student's English language proficiency and the impact of English language proficiency on disability and how the intersection of these two manifest in the classroom in a variety of settings. Next slide. So all of this to get us to the development of the present levels of performance for the student. So going back to the initial slide about educational benefit and strengths, weaknesses, dimensions of identity, we want to remember that critical to the development of the present levels is, are we aware of the student's strengths, preferences, and interests? And are these clearly identified? As well as any concerns that the parent identified. Again, going back to the appendix where you can collect data or information from the parent prior to having that IEP meeting as you're building and developing the IEP. Review goals and objectives from the last IEP, document if met or not met. Now that you've developed a little bit more understanding in what English language proficiency is and how it impacts learning, might that inform why a goal was not met? Might it be as simple as providing linguistic supports for particular tasks and purposes? Are all sections in the present levels and functional performance addressed? Do we have the most recent and just state and district assessments? Have we reviewed the results of hearing and vision screenings? Have we identified all areas of needs? And does it clearly reflect the student's performance in the educational setting? Again, some ed benefit reminders in the drafting of the plot. Next slide. So this form was first introduced in Chapter 4, and these appendices now coupled with the deeper understandings of the individual's English language proficiency level and their linguistic support needs to address their necessary language needs, take on a whole new level of importance. A form, we all know, is only as good as the information that is entered. Knowing that a student is at the emergent level and what is being required academically is critical too. So if the student is emergent, level 1, and academically the requirement is a 3-paragraph essay responding to a prompt that requires a reading of multiple sources of grade level text, might now pose a series of questions that we might need to consider deeply as we are developing our IEP plans for our students. Next slide. All of this information also informs and supports the identification of accessibility and supports in the classroom and also for statewide assessments. Let's take a look into this specific area. Next slide. So when we're drafting the special factors, we want to look at behavior, English language proficiency, blindness or visual impairment, communication needs, deafness, and assistive technology. We want to consider assistive technology based on student needs. And we know that assistive technology can range from no tech to low tech to high tech. We want to consider low incidence services. And for English learners specifically, are English learners with disabilities provided with instructional systems and supports which meet their ELD and disability needs? Again, that intersection. And how and where will English language development be provided? So these are important to discuss as a team and in determining what would best support the student. In selecting assistive technology that is supportive to students and their language proficiency and their identified disability category is critical. Going back to give you an example of a student who is at the emergent level, right? So we have a student who is at the emergent level who is struggling with writing. Now, traditionally in our classrooms, perhaps speech to text has been an appropriate assistive technology support. A lot of students benefit from it. They're able to dictate, it generates the text, they're able to submit, and now I have a clear understanding of what the student can do. However, if we consider English learner typologies, we know that there is a vast array of English learner typologies that might be a level 1, an emergent English learner, right? So we can have an emergent English learner who has been in US schools and California schools for many years and is rather BICY, has those BICS, those basic interpersonal communication skills, right? However, we also have newly arrived students who some might have educational experience, structured, consistent educational experience. And then we might have those students who have limited schooling and are new arrivals to the California school system or the United States. So in order to support them, we think, you know what, I'm going to give them access to AT, speech to text is going to be supportive of writing tasks. This will be a benefit to the student. However, we need to consider that if this student had limited schooling and little to no access to technology, perhaps speech to text might not be appropriate. Additionally, if we consider phonemic development, phonemic production, the student might be at a level where English phonemes are not as clearly articulated as those in their primary language. So as they are dictating into speech to text, these might pose a source of frustration now because what they are thinking they are saying isn't necessarily matching up with the text. So again, this might not be the case all the time, but these are specific considerations, which is why AT considered should be on a case by case, considering disability category and English language proficiency, because that's what's going to guide our discussion and our determination of what levels of supports are appropriate for students, specifically students who are English learners, and considering the vast array of English learner typologies that we work with in our classrooms. Next slide. So in increasing access with assistive technology, there are many resources available out there, from Understood to Reading Rockets to Colorín Colorado, and also our own website with AT resources. And all of these are available for you to access and peruse to see which of these resources that are made available best support a student's needs and a student's strengths. Again, the consideration of both these points is important when determining what assistive technology will support the student in increasing their access. Next slide. So as we mentioned earlier, when discussing special factors for our students who are dually identified, we touched upon the need of identifying who and where would be providing ELD. Well, we want to also spend some time indicating that comprehensive ELD is both integrated ELD and designated ELD. So as a comprehensive approach to ELD, the ELD framework, the ELD framework states that English learners at all proficiency levels and at all ages require both integrated and specialized attention to their particular language needs or designated ELD. And again, this is applicable to all English learners, including English learners with disabilities. Next slide. Which takes us to the discussion of LPAC, right? So we talked earlier about that initial LPAC, the summative LPAC, that annual LPAC. We talked about assistive technology supports. We talked about language supports, comprehensive ELD being integrated and designated. Well, when it comes to determine what type of assessment would be appropriate for the student, for English learners with an IEP, the IEP might come to the point where, after considering all assistive technology supports, all accessibility resources as they relate to assessment and to classroom instruction, the IEP team might come to a consensus that perhaps a domain exemption might be appropriate. So domains which are accessible with the use of universal supports, universal tools, designated supports, under accommodations shall be administered. However, only when a domain is not accessible may the IEP team determine that a domain exemption from one domain, only one, of the oral language composite and only one from the written language composite, reading or writing, may be exempted. So because if you exempt from both of each one of the domains, then you are you generate a loss score, lowest obtainable score. So considering how the disability impacts the student's performance in accessing that particular domain which is being assessed, once the IEP team determines that it might be necessary after exhausting all universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations, then perhaps this discussion should be held, documented, and then established in the IEP. Next slide. So here we have some considerations for statewide assessments. We touched briefly on those domain exemptions, but there are additional ones to consider. What accessibility resources have been applied to the SBAC and the LPAC administration by domain? Not just overall, but consider domain. How do the accessibility resources support the students' identified needs? How are the accessibility resources supports provided during instruction? Because again, turning these supports just for assessment once a year, if these are not accessed during instruction, then now we're talking about having the student at a deficit as it relates to digital literacy if they don't know how to access some of these supports. So considering setting some time aside to train them how to use it during instruction and to allow usage during instruction is critical in how they will be accessing these supports when they are assessing. So over the years, were any needed adjustments made to accessibility resources? And how would we find that out? The way we would find that out would be by engaging in conversation with the students. Talk with the students, see if the support was really what they needed. If you enabled text to speech and they were used to in the classroom using a human reader, might that be impacting the use of that support? Where appropriate, were these domain exemptions considered for the LPAC as they relate to those written or oral language composites? And is that documented in the IEP? So key considerations as they relate to statewide assessments for dually identified students. Next slide. Because we know that it's hard to keep up with the myriad resources available for statewide assessment, we developed a Padlet that has information that addresses both CAS and LPAC. On top of addressing CAS, we also have some columns that are specific to the CAA, the California Alternate Assessment, and the Alt-LPAC. You will find all of these resources housed in this particular Padlet, which is linked into our shared Padlet for today. And I believe Debbie will be dropping it into the chat box if you would like to access and then save it, remake it to best meet your needs, and to share out, of course. And as always, all of the resources that we've included in the Padlets are free and accessible to all of you, and you may remake and share the Padlets as needed. Next slide. So we've been talking of this whole process of assessment, data collection from both the parents, teachers, referring to English language proficiency assessment, namely the LPAC or the Alt-LPAC, developing a robust student profile. All of this critical and important. Why? Because it's going to lead us to effective development of linguistically appropriate goals and objectives. The way in which we're going to measure ed benefit for our students. Next slide. So when we're talking about linguistically appropriate goals and objectives, we're talking about the intersection. Again, intersection is the word of the day. Linguistically appropriate goals and objectives address the ELA-ELD framework, right? And we're also looking at disability, and we're looking at the individual student, because when we develop linguistically appropriate goals and objectives, we're not talking about ELD specific standalone goals. Rather, these are goals that align the ELD standards to support the student in language acquisition and ultimately in meeting their academic goals and accessing and making progress at their grade level curriculum. Going back to the example that I cited earlier of a student who might be at the emergent level, qualified for SLD for writing. Now, I've identified in the present levels that writing is an area of need, which then tells me that I'm going to develop a goal that is aligned to a writing standard. But I'm also considering the student's proficiency level, their English language proficiency level. So in the development of that goal, I'm not going to solely go to the ELD standards and develop a goal for ELD. Rather, I'm going to consider what is the content? What is the student going to be expected to do? How does the disability impact their ability to do that? What supports, maybe AT, thinking back to our special factors, assistive technology, no tech, low tech, high tech, what supports might be necessary? What linguistic supports? Right? Will the student require sentence frames? Will they require pictures? Will they require realia? What will they require to be able to achieve this writing task? And how might that writing task be scaffolded or trellised up or down depending on where the student is? This is what a linguistically appropriate goal and objective is. It is that intersection of academic expectation, goals, and access, and the student's English language proficiency, how these two dovetail in this identified area of need and in the development of this goal that will allow the student to access content. Next slide. Which then brings us to that checklist. How do we ensure that all of these things are done? For that, we have Appendix 5.1, which is an IEP team checklist for English learners. And this will guide you again in a reflective practice of making sure that we've addressed all things that are specific to English learners with an IEP. From the classification of the student as an English learner, the student's current level, if a student requires alternate assessments, do we have linguistically appropriate goals and objectives? Again, a very structured document to allow you to ensure that you have in fact met all areas of requirement and need for English learners with disabilities. Next slide. Which brings us to chapter 6, when we're talking about access and equity for English learners with disabilities, and chapter 7, teaching and learning to meet student needs. Again, programming, access, equity, and pedagogy, teaching and learning to meet student needs. Next slide. Going back to our slide where we talked about the thread of ed benefit from LRE to FAPE, now we are considering the continuum of supports and services. Next slide. As we provide services within the least restrictive environment, we need to consider that continuum of support from least restrictive and most restrictive. Again, not having a practice where all students who qualify under blank will go to blank, because as always, the I in IEP is individualized. We need to consider where the student is, what the student's qualifying category is, what the student's language proficiency is, what their functional performance is, and in considering all of these different layers of identity, dimensions of identity, who the student is, what they bring to the table, establishing what is the least restrictive environment for their specific circumstances critical, from general education classroom to push in, pull out, all the way to residential and or home and hospital instruction. Again, a critical discussion for the IEP team to have as they're developing that IEP. Next slide. And the same holds true that least restrictive environment isn't a place, right? That's a principle that guides the educational program for students with disabilities. We know that special education law indicates that students with disabilities should be learning alongside their gen ed peers to the maximum extent possible. And this includes access to the core curriculum. And comprehensive ELD is in fact core. It is tier 1. It is first best instruction. So when we're considering comprehensive ELD, both designated and integrated, The principles of LRE apply here as well. On top of that, we want to consider the least restrictive environment and interventions provided for English learners, such as English language proficiency. What does it look like in their primary language, and what does it look like in their second language, the language they're learning, across all domains? Also, the linguistic demands of that literacy intervention, the availability of native language supports if necessary or if appropriate. And for designated ELD, students should be grouped with students with similar proficiency levels, knowing of course that unfortunately students don't come in nice, neat little groups of 30 or 25, but to the most extent possible. And also for targeted interventions, ensuring that English learners benefit from being grouped with peers with similar learning needs. Again, considerations to keep in mind as we're selecting the least restrictive environment and interventions for English learners with disabilities. Next slide. Because we know that English learners with disabilities have twice the load. They have twice the cognitive load, and they carry it with them in a little invisible backpack. They are learning a new language and learning new content simultaneously. So considering that, keeping that in mind is going to better allow us to have these discussions to meet the needs and improve outcomes for students who are dually identified. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Debbie.
Thank you, Vanessa. So as we lead into section 4, proposing exit for special education services. And this particular section, we proceed with caution, if you will, as all students with disabilities being individuals, as English learners, individuals, as English learners with disabilities being dually identified, wanting to take into consideration their specific needs. And as such, should the IEP team determine that the English learner was potentially misappropriately identified as a child with a disability, that IEP team may consider an exit of the English learner from special education status. Doing so would involve much consideration, review of supports and services received. As Vanessa mentioned and walked you through, if you will, all of the important sections of the IEP, when we look at the IEP in its totality, in reviewing the assessment procedures, their validity and reliability, IEP teams may come to a point where they ask, might it be appropriate to exit a student who's an English learner from special education? Special education supports and services, when needed and necessary, as we know, are very supportive, essential for students with disabilities. Nevertheless, we also recognize that there are students who are dually identified English learners, where the particular student may have been misidentified, quick to refer, quick to assess, and found eligible for special education, perhaps again inappropriately. Should you find yourself in those scenarios, here are some sample questions that you may want to refer to pose as a team as you consider the varied needs of the individual student whom you're discussing. I'd also like to suggest that you may also want to talk, of course, to your special education director, administrator, perhaps even your legal counsel as you consider the implications. Your EL specialists, who again provide and ensure that supports for English learners continue to be provided, because we want to ensure that should a student be exited from special education eligibility programs and services, that they can continue to be successful in growing and learning and developing at their own potential and success rate. So questions that the team may ask are listed here. And as we look at who are multidisciplinary team members, again, we come back to ensure that we have our special educators and our EL specialists together having these very important conversations of what does learning look like for the student? What are the various data points and points of data that we include? Are they culturally and linguistically appropriate? Do we include assessments, as we should, for both EL, adopted curriculum and instruction, special education, progress on goals and objectives? Should the IEP team again consider special education exit? Are there processing deficits or other underlying conditions for which the student perhaps is not eligible under IDEA criterion, but perhaps is eligible under ADA criterion for 504? That they have a disability that perhaps doesn't adversely impede learning, but rather that it substantially affects any of the major life activities. Please note that still, a language difference in and of itself is not a disability. It's not the reason for a referral for special education, nor for a 504 plan. Importantly, as we think and consider the needs of students, what happens? What are the supportive structures that should a student be exited from special education that they would continue to receive? As noted before, English learners would continue, of course, to receive their basic core services of integrated and designated ELD. However, there also may be scenarios where the student may also require reclassification as necessary, and that would be a different and separate process. So as your IEP teams are identifying needs of students specifically, we want to proceed with caution as we walk into scenarios where a student may have been misidentified and may need exit from special education supports and services. In the California Practitioner's Guide, as with each of the chapters, there are student scenarios included. We encourage you to refer to the student scenarios as they're helpful tools. As you look at practical strategies, scenarios about students in our education system, and where teams have considered perhaps for or against a practice to consider additional interventions. So here in this particular student scenario of Edgar, you can see again what the thought process was of the IEP team and how they consider the potential exit from special education for this particular student. And then lastly, section 5 of the California Practitioner's Guide is dedicated to all things reclassification from English learner status. Chapter 9 is reclassification of English learners. And as we look at the multidisciplinary team requirement, again, of value and ensuring that students are looked at in response to all of their varied needs as a dually identified English learner with a disability. And we start with that English language proficiency level. The English language proficiency level, as it is stated now, overall score performance level of 4 on the LPAC. As Vanessa clearly described the features of listening, speaking, reading, and writing on that English language proficiency assessment. We, as noted, may have students who had domain exemptions, as we want to ensure that students are assessed for their true English language proficiency and not their disability. So there may be scenarios where, in addition to universal supports, designated supports, and accommodations, a student may need a domain exemption. And given the scores of our students and the progress made towards English language proficiency, teams may begin to consider reclassification of English learners. And it's not to say that we're in a rush to reclassify English learners, but rather to acknowledge our students making progress. That's truly what we hope to see of all English learners, that incremental progress is noted as students develop and expand their English language proficiency, that we continue to integrate with fidelity the English language development standards, that in addition, students who are English learners with disabilities continue on top of their services as a student eligible for special education supports and service, that they continue to receive designated and integrated in ELD with fidelity, those English language goals that are linguistically and appropriate as we consider student performance on the far end of these 4 prongs. So as we first start with English language proficiency assessment, we then move over to teacher evaluation, and not limited solely to teacher benchmark assessments, but could include, again, an array of assessments, documents, and observations that have been collected by your teachers. Parent involvement, as we look at parent and guardian supportive structures, and ensuring that they too have a voice, just as parents and guardians have voice during the initial referral process, at the SST process, at the inception when they are completing the home language survey, during the SST, the IEP, and now should students be reclassified, that students again and their parents have voice, that it's meaningful we consult with them through the redesignation process. And lastly, student performance as that fourth prong in this reclassification requirement, which would include your CASP assessments. We'd also want to ensure that we're including through this process the goals and objectives, those linguistically appropriate goals and objectives, to ensure that students with disabilities are making progress as both their needs related to their disability and their needs as related to their English language acquisition and proficiency. When we take together all of these prongs, always remember, friends, refer to your EL specialist at your districts, your county offices, to ensure that you are following your EL master plan. The EL master plan included within each of your school districts should be followed. Perhaps this conversation may also lead you to revisit your English language learners reclassification policies, your practices, both written and unwritten, as you might identify where again, how have we included promising practices and where perhaps refinements are needed as we specifically look at the needs of English learners and English learners with disabilities uniquely throughout this process. Students with disabilities, they may be reclassified. And these are the three pathways as noted in the California Practitioner's Guide. As we consider the varying needs of English learners, students in pathway 1, your English learners with disabilities who are able to demonstrate that proficiency, that level 4 status on the LPAC, if you will, for listening, speaking, reading, and writing, with or without accommodations. The same would be true in that pathway 1, where we have students who may have received a domain exemption to meet their unique needs. And then we have students in pathway 2, our students with significant cognitive impairments. This November 1st, we'll have the launch of the alternate LPAC. The alternate LPAC will replace all summative locally determined alternate assessments in California. So as all students with significant cognitive impairments, as their IEP team deems them appropriate for taking an alternate English language proficiency assessment, students based on those assessment results may be considered for pathway 2, where the alternate assessment, again, achievement, indicating again proficiency in English language proficiency on that particular assessment, the alternate LPAC, they could be considered in this second pathway towards reclassification from EL status. And then pathway 3 for English learners with disabilities, who the assessment in one or more domains, again, even with domain exemptions, continue to struggle, where students may again have difficulties as a result of their disability, where they are not eligible as a student with a significant cognitive impairment to take an alternate assessment, and where again the assessment, given all of its accessibility tools, they are not able to access accordingly that assessment. Those are very important conversations, and again, why the IEP team members should always be included for a dually identified student in this reclassification process, in the discussion, because as we note, not all students will be reclassified as a result of that team meeting. There may be further suggestions, recommendations, interventions, supports, and structures added to the student through their comprehensive ELD program, and perhaps also through the IEP program, to ensure that the student continues to make progress towards English language proficiency and it receives the supports he or she needs. So students with disabilities, again, as some may be reclassified given these three pathways, and some may need, again, more supportive structures and supports to achieve English language proficiency prior to reclassification. Student scenarios are always helpful in this conversation. There are some varied scenarios in the California Practitioner's Guide related to students in each of the three pathways. So if you are having wonderings, your teams at your respective school sites are having wonderings on the various pathways and questions and considerations to take into account, we highly recommend the student scenarios in this last chapter of the Practitioner's Guide so that you can explore and identify. As noted earlier, the alternate English language assessment, the alternate LPAC, will go live November 1st, which will replace any locally determined assessments. However, for the initial LPAC of students with significant cognitive disabilities, you may continue to use your locally determined alternate assessment of English language proficiency. For more information on the alternate LPAC, please also do refer to our Padlet and to our website, where you can also watch a short introductory video and work with your respective teachers who will be the test examiners, administrators of the alternate LPAC, as they will need to begin training within the Moodle website on the LPAC website for test examiner certification to administer the alternate LPAC. So that is new in California for all of us. With that, we want to give you a little bit of time to explore our resources on our website, because we know that we quickly went through this journey across the California Practitioner's Guide, and you may be having or thinking about different entry points. As again, the Padlet is set up by chapters. Where you need to delve into deeper, again, that is your choice based on the needs as you see them within your respective districts, SELPA, school sites, or COEs. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Vanessa as she helps you explore our Improving Outcomes for English Learners with Disabilities SELPA website.
Thank you, Debbie. Let me see. Could you stop sharing so I can start? Thank you. All right. Can you see my screen? Okay, perfect. So the resources we referenced today, every single resource included in the Padlet can also be found in our website. We like to practice what we preach, so we really like establishing our resources in a way that allows you to find an entry point depending on your need or your role as a practitioner. Resources related to our website can be found within our Imperial County SELPA. They're all housed here. So if you go to icoe.org/SELPA, you'll end up at this page. If you look at this purple bar, the third option is Improving Outcomes for ELs with Disabilities. Here you will find resources related to all things English learners with disabilities, specifically our grant work. We have archived recorded training modules. So if you're interested in looking at some of our training modules that have been recorded in the past and accessing related resources, you can do that in this specific tab. So again, let me show you. Hover, come down, click training resources, and you'll end up at this page. This page will give you access to videos that we've recorded, either ourselves or with experts in the field, which we've hosted, the latest being Dr. Ortiz, who did 2 sessions with us, an evaluation of culturally and linguistically diverse populations and a follow-up Q&A session. All of these videos are recorded and have corresponding materials and resources linked to each of these videos. For example, if you're looking to learn more about literacy development and English learners with disabilities, you would click on this video, view it here, open it in YouTube, and also be able to download materials and resources specific to that video here. All of these videos are shareable as well. Same with the documents that support the videos. Feel free to access them and share them out. We are constantly building this page as we record sessions and make them available to practitioners in the field. If you're looking to learn about upcoming training opportunities, you would then scroll down to the second section in our drop-down menu, Training Opportunities. Now, where I want to spend the bulk of our time today is in the Resources tab. So I know it can be overwhelming to receive all sorts of information, and sometimes it's best to set it aside and then return to it once that cognitive clutter has gone away. So I want to let you know where you can find the resources in the Padlet and then some. So if you hover over resources, this will pop out this drop down menu. Now, again, practicing what we preach, we like to provide multiple entry points. So for some of us, this might work fine. For some of us, we need to see it more laid out. We need it to be more static in space. So if you just click on resources, it will give you those exact same options, but in this format where you can spend your time looking at the different buttons that you might want to click to learn more. So once we're here at the resources page of our website, you can see information related to the practitioner's guide and its appendices, frequently asked questions, CDE English Learners with Disabilities website, ELD standards, all things LPAC, all things SBAC, our infographics, and additional resources. If you scroll further down, you'll see 3 of our featured Padlets. Again, these are not all of the Padlets that we have. We have additional ones listed up here, and we'll go through them briefly. If I'm looking to access resources related to the practitioner's guide, what we've done is we've taken the practitioner's guide and separated it into its corresponding sections and chapters. So as Debbie mentioned, we want to provide practitioners with multiple entry points. Our roles sometimes dictate that we have a focus on specific areas that relate to English learners with disabilities. So for example, if I'm an English learner specialist and I'm looking to learn a little bit more about the pathways of reclassification, then perhaps I don't want to start with section 1. Perhaps I want to look briefly. Reclassification is in section 5. There's only one chapter, chapter 9. Let me click on chapter 9 and go specifically to the area that I'm interested in learning more about, or where I might have some need to receive further clarification and/or information. What we've done here is we've linked it directly to the page, so you don't have to scan through the entire document. If I want to go to chapter 9, I click on chapter 9 and it will bookmark me straight to chapter 9. I don't have to dig, I don't have to scroll, it takes me directly to where I need to go. What we've also included in this page are the appendices. The appendices can be found in the practitioner's guide and the appendices section. Not a problem. However, what we've done is we've taken them apart and we've made them available separately. That way, if you want to look at only one appendix and be able to save that PDF document and save you the hassle from going through you yourself, converting these into standalone documents, we've done that for you. These have not been edited at all from what is included in the practitioner's guide. The only difference is that they're standalone documents that you can now fill out, save, and print. Again, you want to do that first by saving locally to your preferred location, and then filling them out, printing them, saving them, sending them out electronically as you see fit to best meet your needs. If we scroll further down, you will also see all of the figures referenced by chapter, and these are available in accordion format. So if you're looking to find resources that are specific to the development of the IEP, we know that that was section 3 because I can see it visually now here. I know it's chapter 5, developing an IEP for English learners. I go down here, expand, and I find figures that support the development of the IEP, from strategies to support active parent engagement, the parent report, and examples of linguistically appropriate goals and objectives in 3rd grade, 7th grade, and high school. Again, all of this information is listed here with multiple entry points depending on your role as a practitioner that supports meeting the needs of English learners with disabilities. Going back to our resources page, we can take a look at some of the other supports here. The California Practitioner's Guide has a consistent structure. So at the cap end of each chapter are frequently asked questions, a summary, and a student scenario. If you have some frequently occurring questions that you would like to point practitioners to, or if you yourself have a doubt that is specific to a particular chapter, you can simply go to this page with our FAQs, expand the accordion menu, and take a look at a list of questions that the practitioner's guide has identified and has answered. For example, one of the questions that might pop up when we're looking at the assessments section of the practitioner's guide might be this one. When districts are administering assessments to determine special education eligibility of English learners with moderate to severe disabilities, are they required to assess in their primary language? Answered there, additional resource link through a bit.ly link. If you'd like more information specific to chapter 4 that might address that, you would click here and it'll take you back to chapter 4, where you can find additional supportive information to this question. Returning to our resources tab, click on it again, pop open this page, and now I want to take us to infographics. So in our infographics section, what we've taken is we've taken content directly from the California Practitioner's Guide and developed it into infographics that really work as companion documents to the content. So as we mentioned before, the Practitioner's Guide is chock full of information, 400+ pages of information. We know that it's also been divided into 5 sections, each section with its corresponding chapters, yet that in and of itself might not be enough to support our needs as we participate in communities of practice and professional learning communities. And we might need a way to refresh our own memory as we're sharing information out, or as we're working to develop our own understanding. So for example, if I am working with a team and we are looking at teaching and learning to meet student needs, we've developed an infographic for that. And again, all of this information is pulled directly from the Practitioner's Guide. And it's also linked back into the Practitioner's Guide. So if you'd like additional information, or if the snippets included in the infographic aren't enough and you need a little bit more context, you can click on the many live links that are included in each of these documents so that you can go back to the Practitioner's Guide itself and develop that context. So I'm going to pop it open, and you can see this little window here. I click on it, it pops out, and the PDF version of this infographic will appear. You can click on the 3 dots up here and download and save locally if you should wish to do so, or you can just view it here. So you can see chapter 7 from section 3, title, direct link to the Practitioner's Guide. So all of these headings are live links that will take you to those specific sections in the Practitioner's Guide related to that chapter. So we've visually taken the content and organized it in a manner that is visually pleasing and also helps us provide those visual scaffolds to help organize how it is that one point builds on another, builds on another, builds on another. So you can see the chapter overview, effective context for learning. You'll see that the figures referenced in the chapter are also linked, places to receive additional guidance related to those headings, UDL, more figures, a visual representation to support the content that's being shared, more links to the different figures in the different sections of the Practitioner's Guide, integrated and designated ELD, recommended teaching and learning, so on and so forth, all the way down to the student scenario, where we've linked the student scenario, then followed by frequently asked questions. And this is the structure for every single one of these infographics. Now, granted that this in itself is still overwhelming. It's this big, long document. And I always make the joke that it looks like a CVS pharmacy receipt, and maybe that's still not supportive enough for your practice. So one of the things that we've also done is we've made it accessible by blocks. So what you could do is you can click on chapter 7 by blocks, always remembering that PDF is the one that will give you access to the links. PNG won't, because it's basically a photograph, an image, a picture, so you won't have access to links. If you click on PDF by blocks, it will pop up that same infographic in more manageable chunks. So again, if you're responsible for building capacity, or you're responsible for collaborating, and you want to share specific sections of chapter 7 or any of the other chapter infographics that we've developed and made available for you, you can do it one chunk at a time. So I would download. It would pop it open now. And now I have it by chunk. So if I want to focus on one particular block, say that I only want to focus on teaching and learning critical features. Well, here it is. The focus is just on that. You can screenshot, you can copy paste, you can share out just that one particular section, and you can click on the links. The links remain active and accessible, and these take you back directly to the practitioner's guide where these points are referenced. So for example, figure 7.8 are the key themes of literacy and ELD instruction across content areas. This isn't enough for me. I need more context. Let me click on it so that I don't have to be digging through the document, and it will take me directly to figure 7.8. Key themes of literacy and ELD instruction across the content areas. We've made this so that this is accessible for you and to the peers you collaborate with, you support those that are engaged with you in supporting improving outcomes for English learners with disabilities. We want to make sure that the resources that we have put out there are useful in a variety of ways, and to support different practitioners with different entry points. Should you want to develop corresponding slides for that, we've also made these available by PNG. So if you want to make these blocks into different slides, you can do that just by clicking on the image. And now you have it available for you to screenshot and use, or you can simply just create those into a slide deck and cover one section at a time, however you see fit to best meet your needs. Again, this is some of the infographics that are developed related to the chapter, but then as you scroll below the page, you'll also see one of our newest infographics, which is the 2021 alternate LPAC, getting to know the task types specific to the alternate LPAC, our one pager, our statewide impact, 5 stops to help meet the needs of English learners with disabilities, and our collaboration with Captain and Marin County on the alignment of evidence-based practices for English learners and students with autism spectrum disorders. Again, all of these are downloadable, accessible with live links to take you to different website supports, resources that support the content that is included in these infographics. Finally, if you're interested in keeping up with what it is that we're doing, we have a link available that will allow you to sign up for the newsletter. And also you'll be able to see some of our highlights, including our participation in podcasts with our friends at ED&D, Equity, Disproportionality, and Design podcast, also with bright spots on reopening learning loss and English learners, and also articles that have featured our work, and just signing up for our newsletter to receive upcoming information. You'll have access to previous publications, as well as the ability to sign up for future ones. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Debbie to see if there are any lingering questions in the Q&A or in the chat that we might need to address.
I want to say thank you to everyone. Vanessa and I, again, are honored to be here with California Council for Exceptional Children, both John and Barbara, for your support as we work again to continue to facilitate this work in support of English learners and improving outcomes for English learners with disabilities statewide. I don't see any further questions in the chat, so I'm not sure if we want to stop and pause or perhaps stop the recording. Again, thank you to all of the participants for your time. We know that your time is valuable and the good work that you do. So carving out time just to focus on this work, our passion of improving outcomes for English learners with disabilities, we absolutely appreciate you and what you do for students and achievement of their success. So again, we'll stop at this point, and if there are any lingering questions, we'd be happy to stay. We have another 10 minutes that we would love to entertain a Q&A session. I don't see any questions in the chat box. Again, lots of thank yous for the resources, and we're happy to do so. I'm blessed to have Vanessa on my team who is constantly working on new work and infographics. We also have Lupito Rubio on our team, who is an EL specialist with a wealth of knowledge and a tech team who also supports us, as well as our administrative assistant, who is Brenda Sandoval. So you might see emails come from her if you latch onto our listserv via subscribing to our newsletter. We should have a newsletter coming out sometime this month. So again, thank you again, everyone, and feel free if you have any questions whatsoever. Thank you.
Okay, and real quick before you sign off and maybe coming up with your questions, I'll just say a few words in closing. So on behalf of California CEC, I would like to share our gratitude and thanks to Dr. Montoya and Ms. Lopez for their informative and very passionate presentation today. Please remember to refer to their amazing website, as it noted in the chat by everybody, that the Imperial County SEPA website and their Padlet. You will have access to all of those resources. Additionally, the recording will be made available on the calstatecec.org website in about a week. California CEC will also be sending out today's participants a survey to complete for your valued feedback. Those who complete it will be entered into a raffle, so that's kind of exciting. And I would also like to remind you that on October 14th from 3 to 4 p.m., that's Pacific time, we will be having our next California CEC webinar entitled Self-Care for Teachers During Uncertain Times, Developing Skills to Thrive. So we do hope to see you there. So the rest of you may sign off, or if you have any last minute questions, please feel free to type them in the chat.
Thank you all. Thank you so much for your time.
I've stopped the recording, so feel free to hang on for a couple minutes if there are questions, but
Okay.
I stopped the recording.
Oh, there was a question. May I have the EL specialist name again?
Lupita Holguin Rubio on our team also participates in the Bilingual Coordinators Network and connects for our work with the group of EL specialists to also support us in our work. So as we advise always, and working together as special educators and EL specialists, we also practice in that work to ensure that as special educators that we too continuously work with our English learner specialists, our EL division, our curriculum department at our county office, continuing to bridge, to knock on doors and make friends so that collectively, again, we can assist and support English learners and English learners with disabilities. Well, thank you. I see participants logging out, but again, if there's a lingering question, feel free to add it to the chat box.
Looks like people are leaving, so I'm actually going to go ahead and end it.
Okay.
So that you all don't have to sit for 5 minutes waiting. You can go get a little bit of lunch and back to the job. So thank you again very much on behalf of California CEC. Bye.
Thank you both so much. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you.